National Standards, What We're Learning in Beta webinar. I'm so glad to see so many of you. Well, I'm not seeing you, I guess. So glad so many of you are on the call and webinar with us today. We have three main things we want to cover. As always, we're going to start with a quick review of the National Standards Program. Then we're going to go into how to access the online application and resources. And finally, we'll talk about the common issues that we see with applications. And that will be me, and we have Cheryl Aikman, one of our peer reviewers and a Vice President of Development at the Community Foundation for Western North Carolina, joining us for that part of the conversation. We will try to answer questions the best that we can at the end. Please type those questions into the question box, and we'll go through those at the end of the call. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, so if there are other members of your staff who are interested in what we're discussing today, or if there's additional information that your friends in the field need, please feel free to pass this on. It will be available at the CF Standards website. We also have additional webinar recordings there for you and your colleagues to view. With that, we're going to get started. Oof. Here we go. Okay, so as you all know, the National Standards is an accreditation program for community foundations, and it goes above and beyond what the law requires of community foundations to promote operational effectiveness and foster excellence in the community philanthropy work that you do. I'm excited to work with all of you on this. I came from a community foundation, and as a lawyer, I love compliance, but one of the reasons I like it is that when you participate in national standards, I think that it gives you and your board the confidence in your operations and management to take the risks required to solve the social issues in your community. So while it is an accreditation program at heart, it goes above and beyond that to help you in the community issues and in your community leadership work that you do every day. Currently, the majority of community foundations participate in the program. We have over 500 community foundations and 49 states participating in community foundations participating in the program. We have many of the largest community foundations, and a third of all participants have under $10 million in assets. So this program not only assists one part of the field, it really helps all of you regardless of asset size, and that it demonstrates that this is peer-led and that your peers understand what the common elements are of all community foundations from large to small. So we're happy to see participants across the country, large and small, coming together in national standards and seeing a way that they can all participate in the program together. So the program is, as you know, has a lot of value to you and your community, to your donors, and then nationally as a field. By being a nationally accredited community foundation, your foundation demonstrates that it is a credible and trustworthy community partner. National Standards symbolizes the commitment that community foundations, not just one, but across the country have made, not only to be compliant with state and federal law, but also to ensure excellence and accountability of the sector. And some of you in states like Iowa and Maryland understand that because you've seen your states recognize your participation in the National Standards Program. So now that we've talked a little bit about the program and the value and that you're excited about it, I'd like to take some time to review how to access the online application and resources. On the screen, you'll see the home page of the National Standards website, and you'll see some buttons on the right-hand side of the screen saying Value, Process, Resources, About, and Apply. So many of you are familiar with applying through large binders and lots of reams of paper, but starting in January of this year, the application process is all online and accessible by hitting the Apply button on the National Standards website. When you do that, this is the screen that you'll see come up, and you can either register your community foundation or you can log in here to access an already in process application. please know that each community foundation can only create one account, and that's because we can't tie multiple accounts to one application. You can share the login information among your community foundation staff working on this, but please know that if more than one staff is in the program at a time, you may have issues saving your work. So please be working together to make sure that that there isn't an additional person in the program when the person is working on your application, or you may lose your work. We all know how frustrating that can be, so I just want to caution again, you can only have one account per community foundation, and make sure there's only one user in the account at a time. Once you're in the account, this is what you'll see. At the top of the screen, you see the instructions for the application, your registration, sort of your EIN number and your address and your contact persons, and then each tab of the National Standards Review. You can work through this application at your leisure and save as you go. You only hit the submit button when your entire application is complete. You want to make sure that as you're working through the process, again, you're saving the draft and saving as you go. We never want you to lose something while you're working in this process, especially if you've dedicated a few hours of your day. So save early, save often, save as you go, and submit when you're finished. Okay, so while you do your application, I wanted to point out some things that will make it easier for you to understand both the process of submitting and where to find helpful resources. So if you click into the Process tab of the CF Standards website, you will see that it opens onto information about when to think about applying, how to apply, how long the review process will take, and what you should do within that time, and then how to renew. I know this is small on your screen. It's not this small on the website, but I tried to fit the whole page on this one slide. So please check out the Process tab at cfstandards.org for this information. I've had some questions from all of you about how you pay for the national standards once you submit. You'll notice in the How to Apply section that we ask you to make checks payable to the Community Foundation National Standards Board and send those checks to Arlington, Virginia. We are working on an online payment process, and we hope to have that complete by the end of the year. But for the current time being, when you hit the Submit button, you will receive an email reminder that asks you for payment processing. And if you need additional information about that, check out the Process tab, and you have the information right here. Well, I know that you're all thrilled to talk about the sample, or about the process of applying. I know what you're really interested in is the sample documents. As some of you may have heard in the past, we have sample documents that are new and revised for the 2015 review and application from the revision of national standards. So we have over 40 samples and helpful hint documents for you on the National Standards website. And again, you find those in the Process tab. And then if you go into the Legal Compliance section, you'll see blue hyperlinked information about sample documents and then helpful hints to go along with drafting your documents in each section. Please know that the helpful hints for compliance document is something that deserves a look. It is truly the checklist that your reviewer uses when they're looking at those documents. And so by looking at that before you submit, you'll have a very good idea of where your current policies and procedures sit in passing or not passing the national standards. And again, if you have questions, we're always here to answer those. My email will be up at the end of the slides. But please, please take the time to look at the helpful tips documents. They go a long way in assisting you as you put together your application. Besides the documents in the Legal Compliance tab of Process, there's also a Resources tab that's searchable for you to find sample documents that I just showed you. So there's two ways to get to them. And if you ever don't want to go through pages of them, but you just want to do a search, you see that you have two different search boxes that will help you get to your sample documents. Again, please consider using these. We spent a lot of time trying to upgrade these. We heard from the field that you were looking for samples that passed. These samples do pass national standards, and the samples are in Word document form, so they are editable. That said, I want you to remember that if you adopt a sample, you do have to customize it to your community foundation. Cheryl's smiling because we do sometimes get submissions of sample documents that either have another community foundation's name on them or no name at all. In that case, we know you've used a sample, and we're going to ask for additional information to make sure that we understand, that you understand what the policy says and how to apply it. So I want to spend a little time with Cheryl talking about what we're looking for and what we often see in standards applications that will flag, and to help you so you don't make the same errors that we sometimes see in the review process. So first and foremost, when it comes to your governing documents, which are your articles of incorporation, your trust documents if you have them, and your bylaws, we want to make sure that you are consistent in these documents, in any documents that reference these documents, and that none of your other policies or procedures contradict your bylaws, articles of incorporation, or trust documents. I can't tell you how many times our reviewers are looking at a policy or procedure and it refers back to bylaws, and the bylaws or the policy and procedure has changed, and the reference back to the bylaws is no longer applicable, and therefore the policy doesn't meet national standards. Another thing that we sometimes see is that the bylaws or the articles of incorporation don't include all of the information that we need to understand about your community foundation, and that you've put that in another policy or procedure. So please spend a little bit of time on the helpful hints for compliance in the bylaws and articles of incorporation to make sure your governing documents, those really important guiding principles for your community foundation, are really clear, and if they are referenced anywhere else, that those references are constantly updated throughout your policies and procedures. Again, this is a real common issue that we see in the review process, that there's inconsistencies. Cheryl?
One of the things to look for is consistent language in these documents. Just this morning, I was going through some documents that used the term charter for the articles of incorporation, as well as the terms board of directors, board of trustees, and board of governors inconsistently. And when you use terms inconsistently and they are referring back to these documents, then you potentially expose the foundation both to needing to clarify it in your standards review, but also if a policy would be challenged or you needed to refer to a policy because of some sort of conflict or question with a donor or grantee, and the reference is incorrect or unclear, then it weakens your position in terms of that policy. So those terms are not interchangeable. Your documents use specific terms for your governance body and for your articles or your charter, depending on what that legal document is. And looking for consistency across all of your policies is really important.
I wouldn't have ever guessed when I started as the National Standards Director that we had such amazing reviewers, that they would be 200 pages into your review and 10 documents in past your bylaws and say, oh, this is inconsistent with what the bylaw said. These people have great memories, they are very smart, and they really are doing checks, not just of each individual policy, but across your review. And I need you to know that because they are going to flag things for you when they see inconsistencies. So I know we've stressed this quite a bit, but sometimes it feels like we can't stress it enough. The next point that I would like to make is about your board of directors. We are looking for your board of directors to for you to provide information about your board of directors that gives us enough specificity to understand how they work with your staff. That means we need to see job descriptions, not just for your committees, but for your actual board of directors. We need to see that the board has had training and development. You don't have to go into narratives anymore, but we are looking for you to say you have ongoing engagement with the board and you help them understand their role as board members. In addition, we are looking for you to provide board minutes about your board nomination process and how your board has discussions about the demographics and of your community and what that means to your board and who you nominate to your board. So we're not going to make judgment calls about what are the demographics and what does your community look like and is your board reflective enough of that, but we are going to ask for board minutes demonstrating a conversation that your board has had about where it's going with its board nomination process and whether your board reflects the diversity of the community. Another point we want to get into is your conflicts of interest policy. Conflicts of interest need to be signed annually. Your conflicts of interest need to apply to your staff and to your board and to any consultants you may work with that have a conflict while working with your staff and board. While we understand that conflicts of interest are a facts and circumstances test, the National Standards Program now asks you to provide one example in your board minutes of a conflict being disclosed. Now that can include somebody raising their hand and saying, I don't know if this is a conflict or not, but I want to let everyone know that I serve on a board or I'm on a development committee of another nonprofit and maybe they're going through a grants process. We want you to see that your board and your committees are having those discussions, that conflicts are coming up. So we do ask you for an example in your minutes of when one of those has come up and how it has been addressed. In addition to conflicts of interest and looking at who the policy applies to and then how you apply the policy, the whistleblower policy is another policy that we have come back through submissions several times. And that's partly because of who the policy is being applied to. A whistleblower policy needs to apply to both internal and external individuals. That means employees, directors, volunteers, and consultants need to have to be named in the whistleblower policy, right? And a lot of times we only see employees and board of directors, or we only see employees. Please make sure you're expanding that so that the internal and external parties are represented. In addition, we need to see information about who in the organization is receiving the reports and what they do with those reports. We're going to be looking for a prohibition against retaliatory action, and we're going to be looking for language that says the complaints are made in good faith. So please take this slide seriously. These are truly check marks in your legal reviewer's book of what they are looking for when they review the whistleblower. Again, this one comes back to us a lot, so please take a minute and look at your whistleblower policy before it's submitted. We're going to get a little bit into donor relations and donor-advised funds and scholarships for the next few minutes because we spend a lot of time in reviews here, and I know you all spend a lot of time in your day-to-day work on these same issues. So in your donor relations thoughts in your application, I want to step back for a minute and stop thinking about the individual policies and procedures that you submit, and I want to take a step back from the individual questions that you're answering in your application. When we are looking at how your community foundation interacts with the donor, we are looking at the totality of your documents to say, what have you told the donor? Does the donor understand what it means to make a charitable contribution, what that means about the irrevocable relationship of that gift to the donor and for their tax purposes what it means to make an irrevocable gift. What does it mean for community foundation to have exclusive legal control over gifts and component funds? These are some of the ideas and thoughts that you need to be thinking through for all your policies that relate to how you work with donors. And not just policies and procedures, but the communications documents that you submit to us about how you work with your donors. So I just wanted to spend a little time reminding everybody that we don't just look at individual policies and procedures. It's the totality of the information, and especially when it comes to how you're relating to the donor and what information you're sharing with them about the community foundation's control over gifts once they are received. So for donor advised funds, we look for quite a few things either in your donor advised fund agreement or in your donor advised fund policies. First, we want to make sure that there's nothing that contradicts that these gifts are irrevocable, that you outline the terms and conditions of what it means to have a donor advised fund, that there are no material restrictions, and that means, again, that there's no restriction that your board does not have exclusive legal control over gifts received, that your board and staff have a role in grant distributions, and it's not just that information is coming from the donor is acted upon, but that your board and staff have an active role, that you have certain prohibitions about the types of distributions that can be made from donor advised funds. I'll go into that on the next slide. That you have a policy or process for naming successors or not having successors, if that's the case for your community foundation. And a new thing that we are looking for is an inactive funds policy within either your donor advised fund agreement or in your policy. And again, the sample documents have sample language for what an inactive funds policy would look like. We know many of you have inactive funds policies, but again, this is the time to really be looking at those and reviewing them, not just for standards, not just for the field, but because we know that that Congress is looking at donor advised funds, and we want to show that community foundations run excellent donor relations programs and that all of their documentation about working with donor advisors is very well explained and follows the law and best practices. So some information about prohibited distributions from donor advised funds. You want to be careful about grants, loans, or compensation to donor advisors, or related parties. You don't want to see any incidental benefit from a grant distribution. We want to be very careful when it comes to payment of legally binding pledges or bifurcation of a distribution. And bifurcation means that part of the money goes to, say, a dinner for a gala ticket, and part of the money is a charitable contribution. If you have questions about those, we should have a one-on-one conversation. And in addition, we need to see information about how a donor advised fund handles receiving excess business holdings and what happens to those holdings after 5 years. So there's language within our sample documents and that we'll need to see in your policies and procedures for donor advised funds regarding excess business holdings. We've got some language on this slide, but there's further information in the sample policies. In addition, we want to be careful about grants to individuals, grants for non-charitable purposes, or grants to non-charities, because grants to non-charities for charitable purposes require additional work by the community foundation to make those distributions. And that information is under information in your sample documents about expenditure responsibility. And so you see here the 4 steps of expenditure responsibility, and whether a grant requires expenditure responsibility or not is provided for you in a chart on the website that the Council on Foundations has made and that we see a lot of you use in your submission process. So you want to take a little bit of time to get familiar with your donor advised funds and the policies and procedures. We could spend a whole webinar just on this piece, and I know we've only spent a few minutes now, but I hope you'll look at the resources online and ask me any questions via email if you need more information on these points. The last thing I want to talk to you about, and then I do want to turn it over to Cheryl for a few minutes to talk about things peer reviewers are seeing, is we want to spend a few minutes to talk to you about scholarships. First and foremost, scholarships are grants often to individuals in pursuit of education, achievement of an objective, or development of a skill. We look for the grant or the scholarship requirements to be objective and non-discriminatory. Another way to think about it is competitive when we look at who is applying for the scholarship and who may be granted the scholarship. The most important thing that we look at in the national standards process is if the donor or those related to the donor or a donor appointee participates in a scholarship committee, you want to make sure that the donor does not have control of that committee. So that means the donor can provide advice and participate, but only as a minority voice within the scholarship committee. And your board needs to review all scholarship committees with donor involvement, or they need to delegate that duty to staff. So this is very important information that we need you all to be checking on, and something we very often go back to in the standards, the standards review to ask you to be more specific about how you are working with your scholarship committees to make sure that there is not donor control. So I'm going to take a breath now, or maybe a few breaths, and I'm going to turn this over to Cheryl. We've had a long history of hearing from you all that you felt a little bit like the Wizard of Oz with the peer reviewers, and that you weren't sure what they were looking for, and if you could just hear from them, you could be more confident in your submission. So we had a peer reviewer on the National Standards Panel in San Francisco. We have Cheryl with us now, and we will continue to try to engage peer reviewers with you in this conversation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you, Laura. This review session that is being conducted as we speak, and that I stepped away from to join the call, is our first review in the new system. And we are all on a steep learning curve with technology, as well as the way that the information you all are providing is structured. That said, I think the changes are a great improvement, as well as represent a real streamlining of both the process and the information that's being asked for. Change is never easy, so doing it differently is comes with some expectations on both sides of learning. But I think as you get into the process, you will appreciate all the work that the staff here, as well as the National Standards Board itself, has put into the improvements in the process. So the first thing I would say is to familiarize yourself well in advance of the requirements for national standards. As Laura said, you can open and get to all of the required information and look through the standards process at any point, and can, as far in advance as you wish, begin to review, create, and compile the documents that you'll need in order to go through the process. There is no too early for that. The samples that Laura has referred to are amazing. They are consistent, they are clear, they represent the sort of pinnacle of all the samples that reviewers have been flagging over the last several years as excellent representations of what we're looking for. So I commend those sample documents to you. You certainly do not have to adopt them word for word. If you do, you need to go through them, understand them, and customize them for your particular community foundation, and in some cases for the state where your community foundation operates. That said, they also represent documents where you can lay them side by side with your existing policies, fund agreements, or other documents, and literally check off element by element that your existing policies or documentation maps to all of the required elements as demonstrated in the sample. One more note about what happens when we come across a sample that has not been customized or where the customization is clearly sloppy. That raises larger questions about your board's review of these documents in the course of preparation for submission to standards. If your board's not noticing that the community foundation's name isn't correct or hasn't been changed consistently, that's a flag for reviewers across the board. Another thing, and this is really a new element given the new structure of the process, is that many of the elements where previously you had to submit a piece of documentation, now there is a yes, no, or not applicable choice. I urge you not to say yes based on your aspiration, only on your reality. It is in the review, I'll be very frank, sitting in the reviewer room, this is what the reviewers who've been working in the system for quite a while are struggling with. We want to trust our peer community foundations. We know that everyone aspires to do a great job, but in some cases, and particularly when that yes answer seems to be in conflict with other documentation that's been provided, it puts the reviewer in a very difficult position. So your integrity is on the line here. I urge you, again, to not answer yes based on your aspiration or what you hope you will do, but what you've put in place, what is a reality for your foundation currently. If it's not a reality for you, as you read through and prepare to submit your review, make it a reality. That's why the process is open in terms of time. You can take the time you need to compile the documentation, to make changes or additions to your operations or policies as your organization needs to in order to submit the best possible profile of your foundation for the review process. I have one other practical suggestion, and this really comes from my experience both in the accreditation and reaccreditation process in my own organization, but also as my own community foundation is preparing to submit for the next round of reaccreditation. And that is, even on those questions where in the system it is a yes, no, or not applicable choice for you, and there's no document to upload and no further documentation is required to be provided, keep a notebook or an electronic file and file the piece of paper, be it a policy, a sample, board minutes, that documents the basis for your answer to that question. That way, when you or the person that prepares your foundation's accreditation review materials are no longer at your foundation, or when there is a question about what the justification was for that answer, you'll remember and have easy access to the document that you used to justify that. I can just imagine people going through this and clicking on yes because they know well and good their community foundation is in compliance with that question on that standard. But they may be the only person at the organization who knows how and why and in what document that particular element of a standard is captured. And anything can happen. So I urge you to also use this as an opportunity to create a great reference file for all of the standards and documentation for all of the standards for your organization's use. The last thing I want to talk about is a consistent form and format for fund agreements. All community foundations have a number of types of funds. Some of us have more than others. But this is the time in your national standards submission to standardize your fund agreements across your fund types. Every fund type has some different elements, but this is an excellent opportunity to, as best you can, get the same thing in the same paragraph in the form for your fund agreement across the board. The other thing I see for fund agreements, and this is a very particular point, but if there are required elements for fund agreements that you are incorporating by reference to either a policy document, a terms and conditions document, or some other place, make sure the fund agreement makes a clear reference or includes that document as an attachment or appendix or exhibit. We are seeing, and I'm hearing from other reviewers, that the required language or required elements for fund agreements sits elsewhere, not in the fund agreement itself, the piece of paper that's actually executed with a donor, but that there is no reference in the fund agreement to that policy. And therefore, it's hard for reviewers to know that donors are fully informed of all the conditions that apply to their gift. And Laura, I think those are all my helpful tips.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I just wanted you all to know that the peer reviewer tips that we have on the slides are slightly different than some of the things Cheryl shared with you. And that's because she's right here in it with us right now. We literally have pulled her out of reviews to give up to the minute updates on that. So while you have some general tips on those slides, and I think that they're excellent, please know, I know we had somebody ask, wait, are we on the right slides? It's because Cheryl is providing you up to the minute updates of what we're seeing. I also wanted to let you know we have a ton of questions, and we're going to try to get to all of them. It looks like we have plenty of time. If it sounds like Cheryl and I are ever gasping for breath or looking for a word, I've been at these reviews for 2 weeks, and I'll be at them for at least another 2 weeks up to a month, and Cheryl's been in it with us for several days. So at this point, our brains and our eyeballs are a little bit worse for wear, but we wanted to be here with you in the middle of the action, making sure we were sharing information with you in real time. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into the questions. And our first question is, do you have to be a Council on Foundations member to participate in the National Standards Program? Thank you for this question. This is a common question. The National Standards Program is a Type 1 supporting organization of the Council on Foundations. However, Council on Foundations membership is completely different from National Standards accreditation, and one is not based on the other. It's very important for an accreditation program to not have any bias in it based on membership or affiliation in any other group or program. So those are two separate things. That said, I do want to point out that the Council on Foundations legal team did help create over 40 sample documents, and that the Council on Foundations actually provided the initial investment for the online technology that we now have. So yes, they are separate, and you do not, that the council membership is separate from accreditation, but there is a relationship somewhat between the two groups. Second question was that in the nominations discussion, or in a community foundation's discussion about who they are nominating to the board and how to decide on nominations, can that be a discussion at the governance committee level, or does it have to be at the board level? Your governance committee can have the conversation about the diversity of the community and how the nominations committee is going about reflecting the diversity of the community. However, we would also hope that the governance committee is reporting that information back to the full board. So if you're going to provide us with governance committee minutes, we are going to look for information that says that this information was shared via a governance committee report to the full board. Our next question is on the slide about donor-advised funds and grants from donor-advised funds. We have the words careful next to bifurcation and pledges. What does that mean? That is a great question. So, and this is the reason we have careful is we've changed that slide over time because we've been in so many discussions about what it means. So when the Pension Protection Act in 2006 became law, and all of the community foundations, especially you all accredited with national standards, rushed to change your policies and procedures about donor-advised funds and scholarships to comply with the law, there were some outstanding questions about what kind of grants could be made. And that was specific to grants for legally binding pledges and bifurcation, and grants made for something that could be bifurcated, like a gala ticket or sports tickets. Every year, the Council on Foundations asks the Treasury for guidance on these 2 points. And we have yet to receive further guidance after the Pension Protection Act about these 2 issues. That said, the National Standards Program and the Council on Foundations legal team strongly encourages community foundations not to make distributions from donor-advised funds for legally binding pledges or for something that can be bifurcated. So I put the careful there because I know some community foundations like to have more conversation about this, and we're happy to do that with you offline and get really far into the details. We just used to put no, but now I do like to provide a bit more explanation. So thank you for that question. Again, if you're running into these issues with your donor-advised funds, please contact the Council's legal team or the National Standards Program for that information. Okay, next question. When we talk about complying with state law, how does a community foundation know that they are complying with state law? So each state has a department or an agency in charge of oversight of charities. In many states, that is the Attorney General. I know in Florida, I believe that's the Department of Agriculture. You can look at websites for the National Association of Attorneys General or the National Association for State Charities Officials. That website is NASCO.net, and you can Google that for their website to figure out who oversees charities in your state and what they expect from you on an annual basis. And that could be anything from annual reports that you submit to them, to charitable solicitation registration, to other information that you need to be providing regularly. So please become familiar with your state charities officials and what's required in your state and in the states where you fundraise or where some of you do business. I know some of you have crossover boundaries and you need to be familiar with both states. And if you're doing charitable solicitation out of your state, please let me know. I'm sorry, I have to take a minute before our next question because I see a question that mentions the word laughing. So I want to read it because maybe we'll get to start laughing in the middle of our question section. Oh, got it. So we will ask Cheryl to either do a blog post or add a slide of her comments because as the commenter noted, they were so brilliant that we need to capture them. And what I will try to do is capture them on the slides that we have before we send them out to you. She is laughing a little bit for the person asking our question, but you make a great point, and we do want to provide Cheryl's always brilliant feedback for the benefit of the field. Okay, next question. You all love this question. I know this is coming from more than one of you. Is there a checklist or a summary document to help me work through the standards? I do not have a checklist per se, but I do have two things that I think are very helpful for you. On the cfstandards.org website, under the Process tab, the legal compliance section is basically a list of most of the documents that you need to provide for the national standard submission. And then if you go through the other tabs there, you actually can print each of them off and create a checklist. In addition, in the resources section, if you Google national standards with key elements, or not Google, if you search within our toolbar, national standards with key elements, or just the word key elements, a document will come up that's easily printable so that you can be using that as a checklist as you go through the application. One of the things we heard from both the reviewers and from all of you in the review process was, isn't there a way that you can just give me a list and give you a bunch of the policies and procedures that you need from me instead of asking for them on cover sheets? Yes, we can, and that's what we did by breaking up the legal policies and procedures from the 26 national standards. So we've done the best we could in creating sort of a summary or a guide for you, and we hope that you'll use that. Okay, I'm going to take a breath, and then I'm going to get to the next question. Whew, okay. How early can we get started before hitting the submit button if our accreditation does not expire for a year or two? This is a great question. You can enter the online application at any time and start uploading your documents and hitting save draft rather than submit. And you can have your documents all ready to go and then wait 8 to 12 months before your accreditation expires to hit the submit button. So I'm going to repeat that. In the process tab of the CF Standards website, you will see that we are requesting that your application be submitted 8 to 12 months before your accreditation expires. And that's because review takes several rounds and it can take us numerous months. Now, in 2015 and 2016, I can just hear some of you on the phone who have expiration dates in 2016. You're sweating and you're freaking out because your 8 to 12 months has passed. We understand that you're not going to be able to meet the 8 to 12 months deadline because the online application only went live in January. For you all, we ask that you work with us and that you get it in hopefully 6 months before your accreditation expires, or that you're in constant communication with us so that we know when you will be submitting. What we're trying to get away from is extensions on your accreditation date beyond your 5 years, because we did see a time where you were ticking into 6 or 7 years of an accreditation extension, and we want to make sure that we're checking regularly on your submission. Now, once you're in the online application, you'll be reviewing that application and submitting any changes annually, so it won't be as hard to keep up with the updates. But we understand as you all trickle into the new system that there is a learning curve. Okay, next question. What should I do if I don't understand a question being asked? That's a great question, and it has probably 2 answers. First, as the National Standards Director, I'm always available by email or telephone. My email is submissions@cfstandards.org, and my phone number is 703-879-0672. I'll try to type that into the chat box for you all, and it's on the first slide when these slides go out, so you'll always have it. Please contact me, because what we don't want to run into is that you or one of your staff members is sitting there staring at your screen, shaking the computer screen, saying, like, what do they mean? It's easier for us to get on the phone together and to hash that out. In addition, we are in the beta year of this application, which means there may be questions that sound unclear to you, and we have a chance now to fix it. But I won't know if you all don't share with me that a question doesn't make sense, or you don't understand what's asking, or what it's asking is too narrow. So please, please provide feedback as you go through it about how you're struggling with interpretation. It only helps us get better. Next question. When you look at a conflict of interest, Is showing that somebody abstained from a vote in our minutes enough, or does the board have to have a discussion about the conflict of interest? You can provide either a board discussion of a conflict or board minutes that demonstrate an abstention. I would like all of you to think about in your conflicts of interest policy what your steps are when a conflict arises, because we do know that there are facts and circumstances and they're happening to you in real time in meetings. If somebody raises their hand and a conflict of interest is decided that it is a true conflict, besides abstaining, does the person leave the room for the discussion? Do they leave the room for the vote? Do they participate in the discussion up to the vote? Each of you need to decide what you're doing and memorialize that in writing. We don't necessarily need to see all of that information in the minutes, but you do need to determine what your steps are and be consistent in that. I think Cheryl made a great point that if we're asking you questions and they're yes or no, that doesn't mean we couldn't come back and ask you for more information. And so you may be wanting to keep supplemental files or provide addendums to some of your policies, making sure that information is really clear. I am working with our technology team to see if there's a final, upload field or something we can do where you want to provide us additional information. I can't tell you how many of you I've heard from that said, I just need more text boxes. I just want to explain things to you. We understand. We have to balance what the technology can do and how clear we can be with our answers versus the text boxes. So we're going to keep working on that, and we'll keep looking to you for feedback. Next question. How do we know what's new from the old national standards process? It's a great question. The National Standards Revision team spent a lot of time looking at all the old cover sheets and the old national standards and weaving a lot of that information, because a lot of it is the same in a different order or asked in a different way, into these national standards. We do have some new information, like the donor-initiated fundraising policy, the social media policy, reviewing inactive funds policies within your fund agreement or your donor-advised fund policy. So we do have a couple of new things that we're looking for. The best thing I can tell you is to print the document that has all the new national standards in it, or to go into the online process and start looking at the way that we've put it together. I think you're going to see a lot of the same information in a slightly different way, but you shouldn't feel like it's a whole new set of questions and a whole new set of information. A lot of it maps to what you've submitted before. The next question, on the peer review slides, you mentioned highlighting and page numbers. That sounds like something that's important for paper applications and not online applications. Thank you. That's a great question, but I will tell you, page numbers in documents and highlights are still important if you're uploading Word documents to us. A gift acceptance policy that is 500 pages is a lot for our reviewers to wade through when it's only one of 100 documents they're looking at in any one review. So you want to help the reviewers see exactly what we're looking for in the helpful hints documents, and if you can help them by providing a cover sheet that gives page numbers to look at or highlighting the information that the helpful hints documents tell you we are looking for, that's going to help your reviewer. It's going to make your reviewer smile while they're reviewing your application, which is always nice. And it's also going to help with the time frames of reviewing. I know there's some frustration in the field about how long it takes to get through standards review. And we hear you, and we're working on bringing that time down every day. But part of it is there is a lot to wade through when we're making these national standards determinations for accreditation. And the peer reviewers, the legal reviewers, myself as a director, and the National Standards Board take this responsibility very seriously. So we apologize when the delay seems stressful, but it really is because we're wading into the work. Okay, I'm going to see if we have any additional questions and take a breath, but this will give you all a chance to type in your last few comments as we finish up. Oh,
We have a lot of questions.
okay.
Laura, while you're looking at those questions, let me say one other thing about the time period for review and reinforce what Laura said. Each review, whether it's an accreditation or a reconfirmation, I would estimate has between 15 and 25 hours of attention between the legal review and the peer reviewer in the first iteration. And in my experience doing standards reviews, which is now 7 years old, I am not aware of any community foundation which has been in full compliance at the first review. It is very, very rare. The supplemental review can take anywhere from an hour to another 10 to 20 hours, depending on what needed to be supplemented or even completely amended and changed from the first go-round. So part of this is it is not going into a vacuum. It is going to people who are really concentrating and being very careful with the attention and providing a great deal of time to this process and individual attention to each and every community foundation that wants to be in compliance with national standards. Laura is still reading all the questions that have come in. So
okay. I've got another 6 that I'm going to cover. We have 3 minutes left. I can go a few minutes over with you all, but I'm going to keep trying to get to them. First question, how do I know my expiration date? Hopefully, you still have your licensing agreement and it says your expiration date on there. But I know some of you are saying, come on, Laura. So you can call or email me. Again, my number is 703-879-0672. And my email is submissions@cfstandards.org. Now, after each one of these webinars, I get no less than 100 of these requests. And I've now had several webinars, and there's there's 500 of you, and I sometimes feel like I've answered this question more than 500 times. So I have one request of you. If I provide you with this information, please send an email, all staff, to your community foundation or to all the people who might be working on your online or on your accreditation, so that I don't answer this question from one community foundation multiple times. I'm only one person. I'm doing the best that I can, but this question can crush me sometimes. So please help me help you. Another note, I am trying to get a technology upgrade to the CF locator on CF standards so that your month and year of accreditation would be posted next to your community foundation name. And that way you could all look at it whenever you need it. It's taking me some time, but hopefully we're going to get there with technology. Second, do we have to pay when we enter the online application for the first time or when we hit the submit button? Great question. You pay when you hit the submit button at the end. So you can be in there for now and not have to be accredited until 2017 or 2018, and you don't have to pay us until 8 to 12 months before your accreditation expires. So please don't hesitate to get in there thinking that as soon as you log in for the first time, I'm going to start chasing you for payment. The payment is done at the end when you submit your documentation. Another question is there any way for us to review everything we've submitted in one big document? So I will work with WiseHive to create a short video for you of how to do this. This is possible for you to review your application at the end before you hit submit. It allows you to review it all one more time. And then there's a way when you come out of your application into your login page where you can see all of your application documents and you can print them all as one big PDF. It's hard to walk through conceptually without being on the website with you, but I will try to get a short video of that information posted onto CF Standards as soon as possible. Will you receive a notification of your expiration date? Yes, 2015 and 2016 notifications have gone out. We are reviewing most of the 2015s right now. That's why Cheryl and I have our eyes crossed. And then 2017 accreditation expirations, you all will be notified by the end of the summer. Actually, as soon as we get this big round of reviews done, the next thing on my list is to email all of the 2017s and say, hello, 2017s. And then I know you'll all ask me, okay, it's great that my review's up in 2017, but exactly when is it up? So we'll get there. But you do receive notifications. If you're concerned that the person who used to be notified about this has changed or left your organization, please email me who the individual is that should be notified, and I will update that in our records. If you didn't receive a notification and you think you should have, again, email submissions@cfstandards.org. Another question we have, deleting is an issue in the system. So if I upload a document and then I want to delete it, I don't know how to do it. Fair question, again, one that I need WiseHive to create a video for you. We know this is a technological issue in the system, and we are working as hard as we can and as quickly as we can to fix it. I will get the WiseHive response. WiseHive is the group that designed the online application. I will get their response up on the home page of the website under the FAQs so that you will have a way to deal with that issue. And I'm sorry that I don't have it for you now. I will keep answering questions for another 5 minutes. I do see some people are dropping off. I know you have meetings, but at least you'll have these answers in the recording. Okay, I have a question from Scott about bifurcation. Scott, I will get to you on email. That's a little bit complicated for me to explain right now, but I see your question and I will respond to you. Okay, somebody's asking, what is the charge for the National Standards accreditation? So when your community foundation comes into the online application for the first time and you hit the submit button, the cost is $1,250. Then after you receive accreditation, there is an annual check of anything that has changed and a cost of $1,000. So please prepare and make sure that you have those funds available in your budget as you move forward and think about your next accreditation cycle. I have a question about whether you want to submit your revised bylaws or articles of incorporation or your originals. So for all policies and procedures, we want your most recent versions and your most recently amended versions submitted. We appreciate that you have the originals and you should keep them. There may be a situation where we ask for them, but at this time what we are asking you to submit is the most recent and what is currently applicable to your community foundation.
So there's some questions coming in from a number of people about how the process works once you submit. Do we receive questions along the way, or will they be sent at the end? And how many rounds do we go? You will not receive questions along the way. Reviewers conduct their review as a single process per foundation. So when I open up my process with a foundation, I stick with that review until I have completed it as a reviewer. At that point, then I hit submit in the system. The information that I have added, the questions I have asked, and any clarification or documents that I've asked for is recorded in comments that then come to Laura, and then Laura manages the process of providing that feedback to the submitting foundation and putting the process back in your hands for additional, for the information to be added additionally, clarified and questions answered. When you return that submission through the system to Laura, then she redistributes it to the reviewer who worked on your foundation to start with. So each reviewer handles their portfolio of foundations in process from beginning to end, and our familiarity that is created in the beginning of the process carries through all the way to the end. We hope that we can minimize the amount of back and forth, but it really just depends on each review. I want to say, and this is applicable whether you have just started the process and are far in advance of when your process is going to need to be submitted, or whether you're in it. And it also applies to when you're in the process, your first review has been completed, and you're taking care of the steps that you've been asked to clarify, or the things you've been asked to improve to be judged in compliance. Laura and the team here are your most important resource, and she would much rather hold your hand and answer your questions prior to your submission than go back and forth with your organization in a very frustrating and drawn-out compliance review. So I encourage you to log in as soon as you can, start to look at what your foundation is going to need and where there are question spots for your particular organization, and work with Laura and the other folks that she can provide as resources to get those things in order prior to hitting the submit button. It makes it much happier for the reviewer and for you on the other side.
Yeah. Couple more questions. I know we're over time, but I'm trying to be as responsive as possible. So the next one is it true that community foundations are considered new to accreditation in the online process, even if they've been accredited in the past? So everyone, the first time into the online application, must fill it out completely. And that is because moving forward, all we'll ask you to do is update what has changed. This is like the first time when we get all of your documents in one place and they're saved in a cloud, and then your reviews in the future will be much easier. We know that that's a lift for everyone. We're trying to give you as much notice in advance and do as many webinars as possible, but that is true. We have another question about our small community foundation reviews paired with small community foundation reviewers. First and foremost, our reviewers have extensive experience in the community foundation field and may have been at more than one community foundation in their tenure. Second, reviews are standardized across community foundations. We are working very hard to understand the context in which all of you work, but what we look for from community foundation to community foundation is truly consistent. It needs to be for the accreditation program to show consistency and not to show bias. So we appreciate that question. We want you to know the reviewers all do have experience, and it varies, and they're in a room together, and we're using both not just their individual knowledge, but their collective knowledge. Okay, so I think that we've answered most of your questions. If we've missed any, we'll have another webinar. My email address is submissions@cfstandards.org. We're going to put this information online for you. We so appreciate you all sticking with us, and we look forward to talking to you on the next webinar or individually. Thanks again to Cheryl for joining us, and to Storm for helping us with the technology. You all have a great day, and good luck as you work through the online system.